The fluorescent light above my desk had been flickering for 3 weeks. I'd put in a maintenance request twice. Nobody fixed it. That should have told me everything I needed to know about how things worked at Harman & Briggs Logistics. I ignored it, same as I ignored a lot of things back then. Just kept my head down and did the work. My name is Gil Morrow. I'm 51 years old. For 9 years, I ran the operations division at Harman & Briggs, a mid-sized freight and supply chain company out of Columbus, Ohio. Not glamorous. Not the kind of job you brag about at dinner parties. But it was mine and I was good at it. Better than good. I built that division from 11 people and a shared spreadsheet into a team of 34 with actual systems, actual processes, actual results. We cut delivery errors by 38% in my second year. We brought 3 major clients in-house that the company had been outsourcing for years. My last performance review, the one I got 14 months before all of this happened, said, and I remember the exact words because I read it so many times I could recite it in my sleep, "Gil is the operational backbone of this company. His institutional knowledge is irreplaceable." Irreplaceable. That word. I thought about it a lot later. Sitting in my truck in the driveway at 11 o'clock at night, staring at the kitchen light my wife had left on for me. The first time I met him, I thought he seemed sharp enough. His name was Connor Briggs. 26 years old, freshly minted MBA from Ohio State, and the only son of the man whose name was on the building. Stuart Briggs, co-founder, majority shareholder, and the person who signed every paycheck in that office, including mine. Connor started in July. Stuart introduced him at the All Hands as a management associate, which was a title I'd never heard used before at our company and haven't heard since. He said Connor was there to learn the business from the ground up. I didn't think much of it. Companies bring in owners' kids all the time. You manage it. You work around it. What I didn't know, what nobody told me, was that I was going to be the one doing the teaching. Stuart pulled me aside after the meeting. He had that way of talking to you like he was doing you a favor just by making eye contact. "Gil, I want Connor to shadow you. Really understand ops. You're the best person for it." I said, "Sure." Because what else do you say to the man who owns the company? So Connor shadowed me. I want to be honest about this because it matters. He wasn't a bad kid. He worked hard. He asked decent questions. He showed up early sometimes and stayed late a few times when we had a shipping crisis in October that tied up 3 warehouses in Louisville. He pulled his weight during that stretch. I'll give him that. But there was something in the way he listened to me. Attentive, yes, but also observational, like he was cataloging. Like he was taking notes not just on the processes but on me. How I talked to the floor supervisors, how I handled the client calls, how I managed the 2 guys on my team who were difficult, and every team has them, without losing either of them. I told myself I was imagining it. I spent 11 months teaching that kid everything I knew. Client relationships, vendor contracts, the 3-way balancing act between warehouse capacity and driver availability and delivery windows, the stuff that isn't written anywhere, the stuff that lives in your head after 9 years of solving problems at 6 in the morning before anyone else is in the building. 11 months. I remember one afternoon in March, this was about 8 months in. Connor and I were going over the Kellerman account. Big regional grocery chain, one of our top 5 clients. I'd managed that relationship personally for 6 years. Their operations director, a guy named Pete, called me directly whenever anything went sideways. That's the kind of relationship that takes years to build. Connor was asking good questions about the contract structure. I was explaining the history, why we'd agreed to certain terms, why certain clauses existed, what the context was. And midway through, my phone buzzed. Text from my daughter Nora. She was finishing her junior year at Kent State. She just wanted to know if I was coming home for dinner. I texted back, probably not. Don't wait up. Love you. Connor looked at the phone and said, "You've got kids." "One daughter," I said. "She's 20. Must be hard," he said, "being here all the time." I didn't have an answer for that. I just closed the phone and went back to the contract. The email came on a Tuesday in June. All staff. From Stuart. Subject line, exciting news, leadership update. I was at my desk when it landed. I had a cup of coffee going cold next to my keyboard and a logistics report open on one screen and a vendor dispute on the other. Normal morning. I clicked it. The email announced that Connor Briggs had been appointed Director of Operations, effective the 1st of the following month. It said he had demonstrated exceptional aptitude and a deep understanding of our operational framework, and that he would be taking the division in a bold new direction. It said I would be transitioning to a senior advisor role. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time because I thought I was missing something, some context, some explanation, some line that said Gil Morrow will be promoted to VP and Connor will work under his direction. Something that made sense. There was no such line. Senior advisor. That's what 9 years became. That's what irreplaceable got translated into. A title with no direct reports, no budget authority, no decision-making power. A title that means, we want you to stay long enough to finish the handoff, and then we want you to be quiet. I closed my laptop. I sat there for a minute. The fluorescent light above my desk was still flickering. I picked up my coffee, walked to the break room, poured it down the sink, and stood at the window looking at the parking lot for probably 4 minutes, maybe 5. Then I walked back to my desk and called my wife. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," I said. "Hey. What's wrong?" That's the thing about 22 years of marriage. She knew from one word. I told her what the email said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet." But I was already thinking. I didn't do anything that day. Or the next. I went home, had dinner with my wife, and we talked for a long time at the kitchen table after the dishes were cleared. I want to be clear about what that conversation was, because it wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't her telling me to fight back. It wasn't her telling me to accept it. It was just honest. She said, "You've given this place 9 years. If they want to do this, that's a decision they've made. The question is what you want." I said I wanted what I'd earned. She nodded and let that sit. We talked about money. Nora had 1 more year of school. We had the house, the car payments. I had a 401k that was in decent shape. I had been maxing contributions for the last 6 years. But decent shape isn't the same as walk away tomorrow shape. We had an emergency fund, 6 months of expenses, which is what every financial advisor tells you to keep, and most people don't actually have. We had it. She said, "So you have time to be deliberate." I said, "Yeah." She said, "Then be deliberate." I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and ran through it all. Every client, every relationship, every contract I'd personally negotiated. And I started to understand something. The company needed me more than the email implied. They needed me to stay calm and smooth the transition and not make noise. They were counting on me being the kind of person who put his head down and got on with it. I had been that person for 9 years. I thought about whether I still wanted to be. I requested a meeting with Stuart the next morning. His assistant put me in for 11 o'clock. I got there early and sat in the chair outside his office and looked at the framed photos on the wall. The company's founding in 1987, the ribbon cutting on the new warehouse, the holiday party from 2 years ago where I'm standing in the back corner holding a cup of eggnog I didn't want. Stuart came out at 5 past. Handshake, smile the whole performance. He gestured me in, closed the door, offered me coffee. I declined. He went first. He said he hoped I understood the decision. He said it wasn't a reflection of my contributions. He said senior advisor was a meaningful role, an important role, and that Connor would rely heavily on my experience. He said institutional knowledge, the same way my old performance review had, like it was a compliment. I let him finish. Then I asked 2 questions. First, was there a path to the director title for me, meaning in any timeline, any future restructuring? He said, we really see Connor growing into that role long term. Second, what did the senior advisor compensation look like? He slid a paper across the desk. It was $4,000 less per year than what I was currently making, with a note that my bonus structure would be reevaluated, which means eliminated under the new framework. I looked at the number. I nodded slowly. I said, I appreciate you meeting with me, Stuart. He relaxed. You could actually see it. His shoulders dropped a ½ inch. He thought it was over. I stood up, shook his hand, and walked out. I spent the next 3 weeks being the most professional version of myself that I had ever been. I showed up on time. I finished my projects. I answered every email. I helped Connor with 2 client issues that came up. Did it thoroughly, no attitude, no passive aggression. I trained him on the Kellerman account renewal that was coming up in the fall and walked him through every note I had on Pete's preferences and history. I also, very quietly, had 2 conversations. The first was with a recruiting firm I'd worked with 5 years earlier when I'd briefly considered leaving. I called the contact I'd stayed in touch with, a woman named Sandra, and told her I was quietly looking. She said she had 2 ops director roles open within 60 miles of Columbus and could have me in front of both hiring managers within 2 weeks. The second conversation was with Pete at Kellerman. Pete and I had been working together for 6 years. We'd had beers at an industry conference in Indianapolis 3 years back. His daughter and my daughter were almost the same age. It was the kind of professional relationship that had, over time, quietly become something closer to a friendship. I called him on a Thursday afternoon from my car in the company parking garage. I told him what had happened, plainly, without bitterness, just the facts. I told him I would likely be leaving Harman & Briggs within a month or 2. I told him that I thought he deserved to know before he heard it from someone else, and before the account renewal came up. Pete was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Gil, where are you going? I said I was figuring that out. He said, keep me posted. That was all, but I heard what he meant. I got an offer 3 weeks later. Operations director at a company called Meridian Supply Group, based in Dublin, just outside Columbus. Slightly larger than Harman & Briggs. Compensation was 19% higher than what I'd been making, with a performance bonus structure, full benefits, and a title that meant something. I gave Stuart 2 weeks' notice on a Monday morning. I did it in person, in his office, at 8:30 a.m. before Connor was in. I kept it short. I thanked him for 9 years and said I was moving on. He looked genuinely surprised, which surprised me. He started to say something about my role evolving, about how they'd planned a longer transition period, about how Connor still needed. I said, I understand. The 2 weeks starts today. I walked out and went back to my desk. I won't pretend it didn't feel like something. It felt like a lot. 9 years of my life existed in that building. In the processes I'd built, the systems I'd designed, the relationships I'd maintained. Walking out of Stuart's office, I felt the weight of all of it lifting, but lifting slowly, like a weight you've been carrying so long you've forgotten it's there until you start to put it down. I texted my wife, gave notice. 2 weeks. She replied with 3 words, proud of you. Then she sent a 4th, dinner tonight? I replied, absolutely. The 2 weeks were fine, professional. Connor was polite and a little awkward around me, which I understood. I finished what I needed to finish. I documented everything carefully, not because I had to, but because I take my work seriously, and I didn't want clients or vendors to suffer for decisions that had nothing to do with them. Pete called me 3 days before my last day. He said Kellerman was going to be moving their logistics contract to Meridian when it renewed in November. He'd already spoken to someone there. He just wanted me to know. I told him I appreciated it. I told him I hadn't asked for that. He said, "I know you didn't." My last day was a Friday. There was no party, which was fine. A few people came by my desk during the afternoon. Colleagues I'd worked with for years. Handshakes, a few hugs, some quiet words that meant more than any of them probably realized. One of my floor supervisors, a guy who'd been with me for 7 years, stood at my desk for a minute and didn't say much, just shook my head and said, "It's not right, Gil." I said, "I know, but I'm going to be okay." I boxed up the things at my desk, which wasn't much. A photo of Nora at her high school graduation. A small plaque from when we hit our 5-year safety milestone on the warehouse floor. A coffee mug from an industry conference in 2019 that I'd never thrown away for no particular reason. I carried the box to my truck, set it on the passenger seat. I sat there for a few minutes before starting the engine. The sky was doing that thing it does in Ohio in late summer. Still bright at 6 o'clock, but with that first suggestion of early fall, the light going a little gold at the edges. I could see the building from where I was parked. The sign, the loading dock I'd redesigned in my 3rd year, the parking spots near the entrance that we'd reconfigured to improve traffic flow, which was my idea, which nobody remembered was my idea. I thought about 9 years. I thought about all the early mornings and the missed dinners and the performance review that said irreplaceable, and then a Tuesday morning email that proved otherwise. I thought about my wife at the kitchen table saying, "Be deliberate." I thought about Nora texting me in the middle of a meeting, "Dad, when are you coming home?" And me saying, "Probably not tonight." The railroad truck. On the way home, I called Nora. She was in her apartment near campus. I told her what had happened, the whole story, start to finish. She'd known pieces of it, but not all of it. She listened without interrupting, which isn't always her style, and when I finished, she was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Dad, that's messed up." I laughed. First real laugh in about 3 weeks. "Yeah," I said. "It is. But you're okay?" "I'm going to be," I said. "You're going to be better than okay," she said. "You know that, right?" I didn't answer right away. I was on the highway, and the light was doing that gold Ohio thing, and I was thinking about Monday morning and a new office and the title that was actually mine. "Yeah," I said. "I think I do. I started at Meridian the following Monday. I won't make it sound like it was all easy. New company means new culture, new personalities, new problems. There's a learning curve no matter how experienced you are, and I'd be lying if I said there weren't a few nights in the first month where I came home exhausted and wondered, briefly, whether I'd made the right call. But the work was good. The team was solid. The problems were interesting. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, when I solved something, when I untangled a shipping delay, or renegotiated a vendor term, or got 2 departments talking that hadn't been communicating, someone noticed. My new boss, the VP of Operations, sent me an email after my first month that said simply, "You've already made us better. Thank you." I saved it. Not to be sentimental. Just because sometimes you need a reminder that the work matters. The Kellerman account transferred over in November, as Pete had said it would. It was the largest single account Meridian had added all year. My boss asked me how I'd brought it with me, and I told him the truth. I hadn't. I'd just tried to do right by the client for 6 years, and they'd decided to follow the relationship. He nodded like that made sense, because it did. I heard through someone, a former colleague who still worked at Harman & Briggs, that the Kellerman loss hit hard, that it triggered a review, that Connor was struggling with 2 other major accounts, that Stuart was in damage control mode by December. I didn't feel good hearing that. I want to be clear about that. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys watching something fail. I spent 9 years caring about that company. Part of me still did. But I also understood something that I hadn't fully understood before all this happened. Your value isn't determined by how long you stay. It's not proven by loyalty or patience or by swallowing things you shouldn't have to swallow. Your value is what you do, the relationships you build, the trust you earn, and when those things are taken seriously, by someone, somewhere, the work actually means something. Harman and Briggs stopped taking it seriously. That was their choice. What I did with the rest of my time was mine. It's been 14 months now. I'm still at Meridian. Got a slight bump in January that I negotiated, which is something I never would have had the confidence to do when I was still hoping for recognition at the old place. My department is running better than it did when I arrived, which isn't a brag. It's just what happens when you apply 9 years of hard lessons to a clean slate. Nora graduated in May. I was there, front row, wearing a shirt she'd picked out for me because she said my usual one was too boring. She was right. She walked across that stage and I thought about all the probably not nights, and I also thought about all the nights I'd gotten home in time, and I decided that the balance was probably okay. That I'd done the best I could with the time I had. I still drive past the Harman and Briggs building sometimes. Not on purpose. It's just on the way to a vendor I see once a month in the eastern part of Columbus. I don't feel much when I see it. A little something, maybe. The way you feel when you drive past a house you used to live in. Not grief, not bitterness, just the quiet acknowledgement that a version of your life happened there. I was the backbone of that place for 9 years. I built something real. I just had to go somewhere else to find out it was actually mine. I've thought a lot about what actually happened, not the surface version, not company, promotes owner's kid, loyal employee leaves. That's the summary. But the real thing underneath it is something I had to sit with for a long time before I understood it. What happened to me wasn't random. It was the natural result of a set of choices, theirs and mine. Stuart made a choice to value bloodline over performance. Connor made a choice to accept something he hadn't earned. And I made a choice, for 9 years, to keep my head down, do excellent work, and trust that the institution would eventually see what I was worth. All 3 of those choices had consequences. Every single one of them played out exactly the way you'd expect if you're honest about how cause and effect actually works. The hard part for me to admit is that I was complicit in my own situation for longer than I should have been. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I kept extending trust to people who had already shown me, quietly, in small ways, that they weren't going to honor it. The fluorescent light that flickered for 3 weeks. The maintenance request nobody answered. I told myself it was a small thing. It wasn't. It was information. I just chose not to read it. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't come from being smart. It comes from paying attention to the actual evidence in front of you instead of the story you want to be true. I wanted to believe that 9 years of results would speak for themselves, and they did, just not to Stuart. They spoke to Pete at Kellerman, who'd watched me solve his problems for 6 years and knew exactly what he was working with. They spoke to Sandra at the recruiting firm, who had 2 director roles ready before I even finished telling her I was looking. The work was real. The value was real. The mistake was thinking it only counted if the person holding my performance review agreed. What I know now is that integrity, the daily, unglamorous kind, showing up and doing the job right even when nobody's watching, isn't wasted just because the wrong people are watching. It accumulates. It builds something that travels with you. When I left Harman and Briggs, I didn't take a file or a database or a single piece of company property. I took 9 years of trust that I had personally earned, one honest conversation at a time. That's not something anyone can reassign. Nora said I was going to be better than okay. She said it like she meant it, like it was obvious. And I think what she was seeing, even if she couldn't have named it, was that I'd spent 9 years building a foundation that had nothing to do with a title or a building or a man named Stuart. She'd watched me come home late and leave early and still show up for the things that mattered. She knew what I was made of better than I did in that moment. The last thing I'll say is this. Walking away from something you built is not the same as losing it. Connor got the office. He got the title and the org chart and the business cards. What he didn't get, what he couldn't get, was the 9 years of trust embedded in those client relationships. That wasn't transferable. It was mine because I'd earned it the only way you can earn something that lasts, slowly, honestly, and with more care than anyone was asking for. That's not a lesson I read somewhere. That's just what happened.